Hi everyone, welcome along to the next edition of our Precursive podcast. Welcome back to our loyal listeners, and hi to anyone joining us. I'm sounding more and more like a radio host every time I do this. We've been getting some great feedback on the conversation so far, and I think really what a number of you are identifying with is that there's a lot of topics that kind of resonate around authentic leadership, about how teams and people are dealing with working in the new remote reality, and of course the rapid evolution of both the customer success and professional services organizations. But I think underpinning this is this recognition that the best companies right now are laser focused on how they can help their customers to realize value, and doing this as quickly as possible to drive better relationships and long-term growth. Now, today, I am very excited to have on the show Saood Shah from Contentful, who has an incredibly interesting career history with the likes of Oracle, Gainsight, Host Analytics, Xant, which was formerly InsideSales.com, and now Contentful. So hello, sir. Thank you for joining us and taking the time. How are you?
I'm doing great. Super happy to be here today.
Great. And thank you for getting up early in the morning, or not too early in the morning, but early enough in the morning to do this. How is life stateside at the moment for you?
Oh man, I can't complain. I'm super grateful to be healthy and all of that. But it's been a super weird 2020, as you know, as it has been for everyone, with coronavirus and then the fires and then back to the coronavirus. And so I think everyone's kind of heard the story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As anyone in the UK who grew up, I'm a 1980 baby, so anyone that grew up following the US and learning US culture as we did in the UK in the 90s has pictures of San Francisco in their mind, and they don't imagine that it'll be covered in smog from fires. So, as you say, a crazy time, right? So
yeah.
Well, look, thank you for joining. If you don't mind, let's just kick off. Can you give us a little bit of an intro into yourself and your background and how you've landed at a great company, which is Contentful?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. Hey, I'm originally from Pakistan, and I was born there. I grew up in the Middle East. I grew up in Kuwait, which was a fun childhood. And then I came to the United States for college. I went to Georgia Tech, studied what most people in the 90s were studying, at least those that were interested in math and science. I studied computer science. I was interested in being part of the Silicon Valley and the whole .com web boom that was happening at the time, and the technology boom. And so I studied computer science and electrical engineering. And sort of my first role out of college was writing code for the Solaris kernel at Sun Microsystems. So that was fun. But I quickly found that there was, I felt like I needed a little bit more in my interactions at work beyond writing code. And there was something about the customer engagement and there's something about the customer that just kind of pulled me in that direction. And so, one experience that I had was I was working at a single sign-on company that was eventually purchased by RSA Security. And I was implementing single sign-on in Texas, across Dallas, Houston. It was for Halliburton. And so at some point I finished my single sign-on implementation, set up all the clients that I needed to, and set up all the software, and went over my checklist. And hey, I'm out, I'm done. It's like, hey, come over here and come over here a second. Do you know what you've done here? I'm like, yeah, I set up the single sign-on and it's good. Like you don't have to, you can now connect without typing in your password. Like, yeah. But hey, check it out. We have this many employees and they forget their password with this frequency. And it takes this much time for us to reset that password manually. And so you essentially saved us this much time, which translates to this many dollars. And we paid this much for your software, which is a fraction of the
right. Yeah.
You get it now? It's like, yeah, value. Got it. Outcomes. And the customer's super happy. It gave me a big Hug, I think it was in Texas at the time, and like,
Do
all
I get
right.
a bonus? Wait, is there some cash at the end of this story?
Exactly. And so like I left that office almost inspired, thinking, okay, so what I'm doing here is not like setting up software. I'm like driving value and outcomes for this customer. And that's what I did here. And I went back home with a new sort of perspective on what I was doing. And then I never looked back, and it was just professional services there onwards.
Mhm.
And I was a lifelong PSer, professional services person. And then that kind of sort of transformed into like customer success as SaaS um, became more common. And so, ran a few PS organizations, and then had an opportunity to learn about customer success at Gamesite, and
Mhm.
delivered customer success to many, many, many companies, which was very, very interesting. And then
Mm.
at Contentful, had an opportunity to, run customer success and professional services and the education team. And so that's kind of been the journey thus far, and
Mhm.
it's been super educational.
Yeah, yeah, it's fantastic. That's a great story. And by the way, if you're listening and you're in sales for single sign-on, or you're in customer success in that industry, that is how you structure a business case, people. Wonderful. That's a great story. I think there's so many things in that we're actually going to talk about today, about the evolving world of professional services and how it's dovetailing with customer success and this focus on outcomes. So it'd be great to come back to that. So, and I'd love to, get your thoughts on a couple of the luminaries that you've worked with, Mr. Kellogg and of course Nick Mehta as well. Some great guys to work with, I would imagine. So, as you in your own business right now, obviously we're living in a very different world to what it was at the start of this year, certainly when I started the podcast. So, how have you seen, or how has your organization had to adapt to this new changing working environment?
Yeah. It hasn't been easy, of
Mm.
course. It's been difficult. It's been difficult for the team. It's been difficult for many of us. A lot of tech um, employees essentially are, like super innovative, and they're scrappy, and many people in our company, Contentful, they relocate to be part of Contentful,
Mm.
and so there's individuals that have little kids, and they're working in their living conditions are not optimal for working,
Yeah.
right? And so that's sort of the problem statement. So well, we tried to do whatever we could to help. So number one, we're spending more time together. So we're trying to spend more time together in a work setting, of course. So like communicating a little bit more, but then also trying to spend more time together in a non-working setting where there's maybe a happy hour. There are gaming sessions that we set up. We play games like Codename that are conducive to sort of online play. So we're trying to be more human in terms of how we engage and how we work together. We're trying to reduce Zoom fatigue. So
Yeah.
just yesterday, I had a meeting with one of my peers, and before the meeting, sent him a quick Slack and said, "Hey, man, we have no documents that we need to share, so it's just a chat, and I'm going to go for a walk, and I suggest you do the same." And he's like, "Great, awesome." And it was just an audio only. It reminded me of what we used to do back in the '90s.
Yeah.
It was
The
just
phone.
audio only.
Yeah.
And it was great, and I was able to walk around, and my eyes got a little break. We introduced a monthly stipend to facilitate purchases that would help over time to, like, oh, if you need another monitor, you need a standing desk, you need equipment to help make your home a better work environment. So we're kind of doing that, and so that's kind of what we're doing from a work perspective. And most importantly, we're like talking to other leaders in other companies in the industry to learn from what they're doing to try and like learn and steal those ideas for ourselves. So
Yeah.
that's part of it.
Yeah, it feels like there's almost been a cycle through the year, hasn't there, where there's been this immediate kind of like shut off move to working from home, which a lot of people in tech adopted very quickly. Then there's the getting used to it period, and like us all being much more kind of aware of each other's lives beyond like the office, because you can see into my house, vice versa. I've seen or met my staff's kids and vice versa in various interactions. My son figured out how to switch on Spotify and play some techno music. This is no kidding. On a call with a client. So he comes in and he says hello, and then he managed to switch. And we were like, I guess that's the end of the call, because we couldn't work out how to switch it off. So that was great. And it feels, but like you said, a lot of companies that I'm talking to now are kind of like, okay, like you and I are talking and we're face to face, because this is we want to have that conversation. But a lot of the time now I find myself trying to just look outside of the screen and as you say, do phone calls to just give my brain a break. So hearing a lot of that. How is that bleeding through into the world of delivery? So in the world of professional services delivery, how has the work with the clients changed? What are the different dynamics you're experiencing there?
Yeah, so a few things. Number one, I think tools and automation have become that much more important. We're not going to be in the office to iron out the wrinkles. So we need our processes and our automation to be on point. And then outcomes tracking becomes that much more important, right? So we're less able to rely on anecdotal evidence. Having been at the customer site and having witnessed their happy smiles and the excitement, we're not there anymore. So we need to get those surveys, and we need to raise the response rate. And we need clear visibility into how our customers are feeling about our services. Also, like, no travel is a huge thing. So that has a couple of ramifications. So we're redesigning our engagement methodology so we can have a completely remote engagement, and that's super, super hard. Especially in PS, which is sort of all about people and all about the connection and the relationship and the learning. And so, we're making use of Miro boards for ideation. Miro is a great tool. And then also the Zoom breakout rooms are also pretty good. And so, like, making use of those rooms to be able to have these discussions, ideation, collaboration, and then Zoom back out or Zoom back in as needed to run these sessions. So I think these are a few things, and we're still figuring it out. It's not all there. Every day we're innovating and thinking of another way to make this remote way of working a little bit better, a little bit easier.
Okay, I definitely want to explore this focus on outcomes, because I think it's something that we're just seeing more and more, right? Which is that you've kind of gone through this evolution of professional services over the years. I'm sure you've seen it since your first consulting gig, right? And we're certainly seeing this shift towards like PS teams being quite inwardly focused in a way, right? They're focused on themselves and being on time in the project and these types of things, to being much more outcomes driven. But talk me through kind of how have you seen PS evolve over your career? Your observations?
Yeah. So I feel like a few things, right? So PS has evolved as SaaS has evolved, right? And so a few like sub thoughts there in that evolution of PS around, we've seen PS move as a driver of financials for the company in its own right around, oh, well, we expect PS to have 30-40% margins, and that's the value of PS. And that was back in the day when we were selling, we were not selling software subscription, and we were basically selling it on-prem. Exactly. And so essentially, so we've seen this move from PS revenue to as a driver of the financials to essentially outcomes, and looking at opportunities to invest those PS hours in churn risk customers, trying to ensure that we can, through continuous iteration and methodology improvement, right? So now if the customer it can very easily sort of pick up their business and walk down the street to another SaaS provider, then it's not just important for us to get them live and get them launched, but also to see them get value throughout their engagement.
Yep.
And also that means that we have other SaaS companies that are competing with us that are also delivering services. And so we can't get left behind in the evolution of our service becoming that much more valuable over time. And so this continuous iteration of methodology and materials and the value that we're delivering to the customer within our own sort of industry is also sort of super important. Last thing I'll say on sort of that evolution is sort of the use of partners has also sort of evolved over time. And so the PS, in my opinion, the sort of the PS partnership with the alliances or the partner organization has also flourished over as SaaS has flourished, because partners can be used as a method to not only bring scale to your business, but also manage PS margins. And so we can, together with our partners, divvy up the TAM and figure out which segments, which markets, which products, which verticals make sense for the partners versus professional services, and we can run a more effective go-to-market in that way.
Okay, excellent. Lots of, I think, very intuitive themes there, and super interesting to hear your experience. So, I want to just go in on a couple of those points then. So let's just begin with this value throughout the engagement, right? Because I often, like, companies are so focused on this, right? The first 90 days, this idea of, time to value, more sophisticated companies thinking about time to first value. I mean, even hearing things of focus around time to value to whom, which is where companies are shifting their focus from the exec, where it might take 90 days, to the end user, where it might take a week, for example, for them to see some value. So when you talk about that value throughout the engagement, that's quite difficult to define. Tell us a little bit more about that. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I think it starts with a definition of what success means to your customers. So I think, like, step one is figuring out, well, what is success, and what are they trying to get out of this engagement? Are they trying to, one, just sort of figure out how your software works and launch their first project? Are they looking to, derive some ROI that has an immediate sort of top line impact? It sort of depends on what the outcome they're expecting from the software is. Then sort of beyond that, I think you kind of look at sort of your levers for driving that value across the customer journey. So there is value to be had during the onboarding, and so I think looking carefully at what outcomes are expected as a customer is going through onboarding, and what outcomes are expected when onboarding should be completed and they're ready for sort of to begin their sort of journey without the guidance of professional services, and maybe with the guidance of a sort of a non-technical CSM. And so in my opinion, you got to sort of work backwards from what state we want the customer to be at when the professional services engagement is over. And we need to hold, like, the CSM team needs to hold the PS team accountable for delivering customers to them at that, inflection point, at that transition point, in the state that we need the customer to be in. So in many cases, this onboarding process ends with professional service sort of throwing this customer over the fence to the CSM team, and then the CSM team sort of having to deal with all the customers. And like, there should be some math to identify whether this customer is in the state whereby CSM team can actually take this customer through to the sort of the value realization and the CSM team should not be in a situation where they're having to face a churn risk on day one. Rather, right? And so And then beyond that, if you examine the counter, if that's not the case, and if this customer really is set up for success, then the CSM team can really focus on their charter, which is um, like validating verified outcomes for the customer, ensuring enablement is on point, being the champion for the voice of that customer within our company, and then looking for expansion opportunity, like doing that evangelism to the different organizations within that customer, which might lead to upsell or cross-sell opportunities and drive expansion. And so instead of struggling to maintain GRR, you're driving your NRR through the roof through like having solid expectations of PS and CS. And so when you have this journey mapped out and you are clear on what state you want your customer to be in which part of their journey, I think you have more clarity on how you would go about kind of delivering that success, what methodologies you would have for your professional services team versus your CSM team versus your learning services team. I think education is a huge part of it as well versus your support team. So it all comes together across the journey based on what the customer needs, to drive those outcomes.
Fascinating. I think a lot of the time you will find organizations who are really always trying to understand each other's processes. So like CS teams trying to understand what PS is doing and vice versa. And I just think that really simple explanation there around what do you want the customer to look like at the end of this engagement is a very, very simple framework to say, let's have a conversation about that, because it doesn't matter if we understand each other's processes to the nth degree. If we can agree on that, then that transition, not that handover, but that transition can go much more smoothly. There's like a lot of organizations now are really being forced, given what's happened with the pandemic, to reevaluate kind of how they deliver value to customers, how they work with customers. And so a lot of your peers that I talk to are thinking about, right, what does the future look like? Now, I'm seeing a few things coming through, like client experience being a big thing. One of our customers is a telecoms company, a Fortune 500 telecoms company, and they talk about professional services as a service. Like that's what they're trying to deliver now in their particular market. Tell me what you think the future looks like in let's say the software SaaS industry.
Yeah, sure. So hey, services as a service is a religious discussion, and there's many different perspectives to it, right? I think like it has been done and it can be done. Mm-hmm. I think it demands that your professional services organization is somewhat mature and has tried out the motions, tested whether this motion works. And if you get to a point where your services are so needed that you're confident that all of your customers will renew your service in perpetuity, absolutely, go for it. You should have a service as a service and make it a recurring revenue, and absolutely. However, in many cases in product companies, services are seen as a means to an end. And the means is, yes, absolutely, there's an onboarding. So you go and you help with the onboarding and then you step back out, right? You have a well-defined engagement that has a well-defined beginning, middle, and end. You come in, you do your thing, you step out. Now, there are opportunities for staff augmentation and continuous acceleration. Yeah, there's the SAPs and the PeopleSofts of the world, which demand, which require an army of consultants to be on site for forever. I'm not sure, like in the world of SaaS, as SaaS matures, I think we're going to see less and less of that as the world moves towards faster time to value, more specialized software, best of breed software, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I think that services as a service is something that needs to be figured out for each company on its own merit for their particular product. I think, though, that the concept of a success package where you have an ARR based package which consists of components which are some services, your premium support package, a premium CSM service, as well as learning to kind of put it all together in a package and present it to a customer. Say, for our largest, most like premium customers, this is your success package, and we will make this an ARR based sort of recurring sort of offering for you. I think that's super possible, and I think that's doable, and that's something that I think we're seeing more and more of over time, to kind of try and monetize all aspects of customer success for the sort of large customers and enterprise customers. I think another sort of trend that we'll see is that learning services and education services, I think, become very, very critical and become very strategic for us moving forward. How? So it's sort of this, your sort of one model is that professional services are out there on the front line, working with customers in custom environments, working on their particular use case and helping them with their particular technology. And there's some learnings there. And so those learnings apply not just to that customer, but many, many customers. So learning services is the vehicle, is the conduit through which you take those learnings that you're sort of getting on a one-off basis and making them widely available to your entire customer base as needed. So this one-to-many motion and this sort of technology or this sort of motion where learning services is this repeatable motion which helps you scale the best practices across your customers, I think is super key. I think and last thing I'll say on this is that I think we're seeing this move where, you know, PS was at one point considered sort of a you know, as we said, it's all about margins, but we're moving towards this world where it's all about outcomes, and those outcomes are essentially the key to driving revenue. And so when you're selling outcomes, and professional services is all about outcomes. And so professional services is really a means to retain revenue and expand revenue and potentially accelerate consumption of the product, which essentially drives expansion. And so in the SaaS world, I think that's where PS is heading. Time to value is everything. You know, the more difficult your product is to launch and migrate, the longer it takes to launch, the more effort it requires, the less likely you are to be successful, frankly. And so the data is very clear that companies that have an 8-9 month, greater than 6 month onboarding have that much less likely. Those customers are much less likely to launch.
And renew, 100%.
And renew. Yeah. Last thing I'll say is that services is a company responsibility. It's not a customer success responsibility. And so services is almost like a business within your business, and it requires support from product management, from sales, from marketing, from even from like development and product management. And so I think we're seeing this movement where professional services is considered like a company asset as opposed to a CS or CX sort of aspect. And then the traditional sort of wisdom around how are you measuring your outcomes and how are you measuring the value of your service is also being taken a lot more seriously, because again, SaaS demands customer success. And so the CX aspect of NPS and the voice of the customer and the CSAT all have a huge part to play in determining whether you're being successful with your customers or not. And these are very important signals for us to continue to explore and learn from, especially in the world of COVID.
Yeah. I mean, a wonderful range of insight there. I mean, I try and summarize this internally as this is the era of experience, right? Where, you know, the customer doesn't really care about kind of you and what you need to do and your steps and your margin and your billable rates and your utilization and all of these things. They really care about their outcome. Like you going back to your story about you saved us X amount of time because people weren't coming to me with a forgotten password, right? And so I think in that world, the being able to make that transition from the sales team out there selling a promise and the PS team being the ones fulfilling that promise along with the CS team, and doing that in such a way where it kind of feels effortless for the customer, because I think the most excited the customer ever is when they buy your product is the day they buy it, right? And then
That's
there's,
right.
then they just want to get their hands on it, and then the minute you trip up, there's that buyer's remorse, and that can just erode client relationships and all sorts of things. I think there's a few things that a lot of people would, I would think, take away from that, which is this idea that of kind of the best ways to lean in and lean out, right? So as a PS team, being able to acknowledge when we need to lean in and when we're going in, but also then when we need to move away and let others, be it learning services or customer success, take up a role in that. So some really interesting ideas there. And I think just your language around scalability and repeatability, because the best services organizations that I've seen, that the customer would pay for that services experience again because of what they learned about their process and their business during that implementation, beyond what they articulated in the sales cycle. So some fascinating topics there. Thank you. So if we move on then, so I sort of turn this over to people, and I'm always interested in kind of what are some of the things that you're super passionate about, because it reveals a side of people where they're talking about things that are close to their heart. But like at the moment for you, what are some of the things that you're at the moment super focused on and super passionate about in your world or in general?
Yeah. So for me right now, again, it's about it's about outcomes for the customer, like surprise, surprise, right? So,
Okay.
I'm in the we're in the process of launching new offerings, and so it's we've kicked off a professional services organization, and we're testing the waters with a few very basic offerings. And so the process to evolve the offerings and ensure that those offerings continue to drive value from the customer, and then like figuring out what those offerings are based on learnings from our experience with the offerings that we've already delivered, I think is one very, very big piece into sort of how we continuously evolve the offerings. I think the second piece is like, how much do you invest in the customer versus focus on your margin in a SaaS business, in an early professional services team? And so we're thinking through that investment and the value of 1 hour of service being delivered in a billable capacity versus a non-billable capacity. So all of that is sort of very interesting for us right now as well. I think the third thing is how we drive scale through partners. And so building an effective partner network that doesn't where both teams, right, the partner team and the professional services team, are working on the sort of subject matters and with the methodologies that suit their teams the best. And so both teams have different strengths, both teams have different intents and missions, and so and different sets of capabilities that drive value for the customer. So how can we craft a motion where partners are engaged to make it a win-win for both parties? So so that's sort of also very near and dear to me right now.
Okay, cool. Well, let's expand on a couple of those. I'm fascinated by the value of 1 hour of PS, because I have firsthand witnessed the reaction of a customer, very large customer that we have, who was, it turned out, using a lot of support time. As companies, I'm sure listening to this will be familiar with this, where you begin to unpick the amount of tickets and actually what the tickets mean. Oh, they're not technical. They're, how do I do this, or how do I do that, or could you do this for me? Could you build that report? And it's basically free services. And then when you get into a situation where you're either having to switch that off or say, look, that thing that you want is going to take an hour and now you have to pay for it, looking at the reaction then from the customer to that. So I'm fascinated by, what have you discovered through this value of an hour exercise?
Yeah. So hey, we're still figuring it out. So the jury's still out and we're still figuring it out. But I'll tell you sort of the different sort of data points that we're considering that
Okay.
are interesting. So like one, we're looking at customers that have gone over on their project. And so, the project was supposed to be 80 hours and the customer needs us to deliver, say, 100 or 105 hours. And so like, what's the benefit to the customer? What happens if we just stop and leave now versus what happens when they stick around? And so, you can see an outcome where the customer is much, much happier and they give us a much higher survey response. And essentially they are able to get to the outcomes that they're trying to get to much, much faster if we are able to deliver this additional functionality or this additional service. Another sort of aspect of that is also helping with expansion. And so we believe professional services is a unique skill set. We are the customer facing team that has this capability to really connect the customer with the product in a way that no other organization really can, and essentially be responsible for making it operational, and making it like ensuring that the customer can derive value from the product. And so when we're asked to engage in a non-billable capacity to hold workshops, to just work through the use case and deliver a design as to how it could work, then that brings the solution that much closer to the customer and makes it almost and get it to a point where all the customer has to say is, yeah, that's what I want. Yes. Yep. Like make that happen. What you just painted, this picture, make that happen. And so that gets us closer to an expansion in many, many cases. Yep. And then the third aspect is when there's a customer that is upset because of a feature that they don't have, or a feature they were expecting, or there's something missing that requires work and their churn risk, and then services engages to deliver. In all three of these examples, essentially, or even like in marketing, like supporting marketing has these field events with many customers where professional services can come in and have a one-to-many sort of session, and we're inspiring and evangelizing to many, many organizations at a given customer, at multiple customers, and driving lots and lots of leads, and in a way that only PS can. And so in all of these examples, essentially, we're pushing to support the top line revenue and driving ARR. Now, $1 of service in company valuations, and we can look at recent IPOs like Snowflake, etc., and you can look at the multiples, etc., and it's absolutely crazy where we are. It's very, very highly priced. And so the point is that $1 of service being earned via billable means is worth $1 of service, whereas $1 of ARR is valued at a multiple of that ARR. And so it's this trade-off of managing your margin and managing your financial model versus investing to drive ARR for the business that every company needs to figure out for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, if we take your example, right, and you spent an extra 20 hours, which let's say it costs you $1,000 an hour, which probably let's say that it does, right? So it's $20,000. If that customer's $100,000 a year and you're at a 10x multiplier, it's not difficult to see the value of that to your business long term. So I totally buy into that. I think there's though this there is an element of nuance to that, which is when you do help in that fashion, I would imagine that you in some shape or form educate the customer as to like, we're doing this and we're consciously doing this and we're letting you know that we're doing this, that this is not necessarily normal, but this is in keeping with our values, for example. Because I think the customer needs to recognize that, right? Otherwise it's kind of like you get into a situation where they're just asking for that all the time, right? Potentially.
Absolutely. And this is sort of the basic discussion around paid services versus unpaid services as well, where the customer will value your service as much as you value the service. So if you don't put a price tag on the service, they will expect it and they'll flake and they won't show up. And in many cases, however, if you put a price tag on the service, but then give them a discount, or then say, hey, look, we're doing this as a gesture of goodwill because we're so committed to your outcomes, and then reinforce that a few times, absolutely, it's much more valuable in that way.
Cool. So final piece. Thank you ever so much for the insights so far. The final piece I want to land on is this idea of professional services and customer success to become one. An old Spice Girls song title, I believe. But we talked about this. You talked through this understanding. Having that clarity on what state should the customer look like for customer success once services is finished with them, shall we say. Going up a level, what are your thoughts on how these two functions need to work together, and should they be one team or two?
Yeah. Hey, I've seen them work in all different permutations and combinations. And frankly, I don't see it as much of a reporting lines thing. Like you can make the reporting lines work any way you want. I think it's more about the roles, responsibilities, and the sort of the charter and the mandate of the organizations, right? So in my mind, the PS team and the CSM teams are two separate teams with two different mandates, and really it's about guaranteeing outcomes. And so across the journey, you have technical product experts, and then you have non-technical, almost relationship experts, and they have different strengths, and it's how you leverage both those strengths to get to sort of optimizing ARR for the company. And so the first piece would be how do we guarantee those outcomes for the customer? And so one philosophy that many companies are investing in and experimenting with is that PS invests until outcomes are realized. So yes, you sold an 80-hour onboarding, but the customer is not in a state where the CSMs can be successful with them. So yes, you continue to invest until the customer is in that state. And so you continue to do that. I think another one is investment in churn risk and tech debt. And so the CSM teams are what I'm calling out is how do these two teams work together to get those outcomes really, right? And so the first one was about the onboarding until the outcomes are realized. I think the second one is, as CSMs in the field recognize and see customers that are suffering from tech debt, or are suffering from there's some kind of risk that can be mitigated by way of some services, then there needs to be this feedback loop, and there needs to be an allocation of hours where professional services is ready and able and willing to say, okay, hey, look, we've allocated 150 hours this quarter for churn risk mitigation. And so CSM team, do you want to use 20 of those 150 hours for customer X? Do you believe it's that valuable so that all of us can hit our retention goals? And then the CSM team makes a determination in terms of priorities, and then the services team invests, and we try and do it that way. And so there's a collaboration and a partnership, and both teams are engaging in sort of their strengths. At the same time, a third thing, I think, in terms of collaboration between these organizations is services team needs bookings, and they need leads. They need services opportunities to continue to fuel their delivery. And so the CSM team can actually be great for hunting for services opportunities. And I've seen that model work very, very well, where CSM teams are a huge source of leads for the services team. And it's not a coincidence that many of those leads coincide with customers that need the help. And so the CSMs are almost being selfish and seeing opportunities to improve the state of the customer for retention and expansion purposes. And the fact that these customers are willing to pay for the service is a win-win. Right? Finally, last thing I would say is billable CSMs is also something that is a possibility. where you have CSMs that are subject matter experts or industry experts, and you can bill out their expertise in collaboration with the PS team. And so these are ways that both parties can sort of work together for sort of those common goals, right? And those common goals are sort of the customer outcomes, and then like driving ARR.
Right. So this is going to be the charter according to Saood. So I'm going to try and pull together some of these threads from today. So one is, if we're thinking about the revolution in SaaS and the evolution in SaaS, then the PS evolution is in step with the way that SaaS is evolving, which I think is a very eloquent way to put it. I think it feels like something that's very core to you is this continuous value realization through the engagement. That being something that I think companies perhaps too often think about it in terms of, okay, analysis, now I do some build, now I do some testing, and it's like, no guys, you got to think about that experience and that continuous value realization. I think the partner topic you mentioned was really interesting, this idea of thinking very strategically about the opportunity that you have in the market, the TAM, dividing that up between yourself and partners. I'm going to pick your brains afterwards on another call if you give me some time about how you think about the co-selling motion there, for sure. A big learning, I think, for anyone in customer success and services is just have that very real conversation about what should the customer look like when they're handed over to you. Well, what do you want from me? That's a very human conversation. That feels like the walk around the block and have a chat on the phone conversation. Do you know what I mean?
That's right. That's right.
And I think everyone should think about the value of 1 hour of service, because that is really what we're talking about. If you are in an organization that undervalues professional services, simply ask that business owner, maybe not in the way that I would, well, what's the valuation of your company if we churn a couple of million next year? How will we hit there? Because services isn't helping our clients to realize the value because we don't want to put in some additional or lose some additional margin on it. So a load of really awesome thoughts. Thank you, sir, for joining. It didn't disappoint. It was great to have you on the show. I do appreciate it.
Hey, Jonathan, thank you so much. I love talking about this stuff. I could talk for another hour, so I appreciate the opportunity to kind of chat about some of this stuff, and it was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.